In the heart of post-war America, a quiet revolution was stirring in the small towns and rural crossroads of the nation. The landscape of retail, once defined by the corner store, the family-owned five and dime, and the bustling Main Street merchants who knew every customer by name, stood on the brink of profound transformation. This was an era when local economies pulsed with the rhythm of independent shops, where hardware stores, grocers, and variety outlets formed the backbone of community life. Generations built livelihoods on these modest enterprises, passing them down like heirlooms, fostering a sense of place and belonging that tied people to their hometowns. Yet, beneath this familiar surface, forces were gathering that would reshape the very fabric of American commerce. Consumers, emerging from the hardships of war and depression, craved affordability above all else. They sought value in every purchase, driven by growing families and tightening budgets. Into this world stepped a man whose vision would ignite an unstoppable chain of events. Sam Walton, born in the dusty plains of Oklahoma in 1918, carried within him an unyielding drive forged from humble beginnings. Raised on a farm during the Great Depression, he learned early the value of hard work and resourcefulness. Milking cows before dawn, delivering newspapers, and scraping together every penny instilled in him a profound understanding of scarcity and opportunity. Walton's journey into retail began modestly. After serving in the Army during World War II, he borrowed money from his father-in-law to purchase a Ben Franklin variety store franchise in Newport, Arkansas, in 1945. At just 27 years old, he threw himself into the business with relentless energy. He studied competitors obsessively, traveling far and wide to observe successful operations. He experimented boldly, extending hours, stacking merchandise high to maximize space, and slashing prices to draw crowds. Sales soared, turning his store into one of the top-performing Ben Franklins in the region. But Walton saw limitations in the franchise model. Corporate dictates from headquarters stifled innovation, and he chafed against restrictions that prevented him from fully pursuing his ideas. A pivotal setback came in 1950, when his landlord refused to renew the lease, coveting the thriving business for his own son. Forced to sell at a loss, Walton relocated to Bentonville, a tiny town in northwest Arkansas, where he opened Walton's 5 and 10 on the town square. Undeterred, he applied the lessons learned, refining his approach to discounting and customer service. He flew his own plane to scout locations, visiting stores across the country, absorbing ideas from discounters like Ann and Hope in Rhode Island and Spartan in Michigan. Walton became convinced that the future lay not in urban centers dominated by department stores, but in overlooked rural communities where competition was sparse and loyalty could be earned through low prices. By the early 1960s, the seeds of disruption were planted. Discount retailing was emerging as a force, with chains like Kmart and Target beginning to expand. But Walton envisioned something different, a chain focused exclusively on small towns, offering everyday goods at prices lower than anyone else dared. On July 2, 1962, in Rogers, Arkansas, just miles from Bentonville, he opened the first Walmart Discount City store. It was a modest 16,000 square foot space, stocked with merchandise bought in volume to undercut competitors. The sign promised, "We sell for less," and from day one, crowds flocked to experience prices that seemed almost too good to be true. This was no accident. Walton's philosophy centered on everyday low prices, a radical departure from the high-low pricing games of traditional retailers, who marked up goods only to slash them during sales. He believed in passing savings directly to customers, building trust through consistency rather than gimmicks. To achieve this, he demanded efficiency at every level. Buyers negotiated fiercely with suppliers, distribution was streamlined, and overhead was kept ruthlessly low. Associates, as he called employees, were motivated through profit-sharing and a culture of ownership, chanting cheers at morning meetings to foster esprit de corps. The early years were a proving ground. Walmart expanded cautiously, opening stores in nearby towns like Harrison and Springdale. By 1968, the chain had reached beyond Arkansas into Oklahoma and Missouri. Sales grew steadily as word spread of the bargains available in these unassuming buildings on the outskirts of town. Families drove miles to fill carts with clothing, household items, and toys at prices that stretched their dollars further. Walton himself remained deeply involved, visiting stores unannounced, talking to associates and customers, always seeking ways to improve. But beneath the surface of this burgeoning success lay the beginnings of a seismic shift. In these rural enclaves, Walmart did not merely compete, it dominated. Local merchants, accustomed to steady if modest trade, suddenly faced a rival that could sell the same goods for less. Hardware stores saw tools fly off Walmart shelves at half the price. Grocers watched customers bypass their aisles for Walmart's expanding food sections. Variety stores, the very model Walton had once franchised, found themselves outmatched in selection and cost. As the 1970s dawned, Walmart's growth accelerated. The company went public in 1970, raising capital to fuel expansion. Stores multiplied across the South and Midwest, targeting towns with populations under 25,000, where big chains feared to tread. Walton's strategy proved prescient. These communities welcomed the convenience and savings, often viewing the new store as a boon. Yet the cost was becoming apparent. In town after town, Main Street began to hollow out. Independent retailers, unable to match Walmart's buying power or absorb thin
margins, closed their doors one by one. Boarded-up storefronts appeared where once vibrant shops had stood, eroding the commercial heart of small-town America. This was the dawn of an empire, built on a promise of abundance for the masses. But as Walmart's footprint expanded, so too did the shadows it cast. The rise was inexorable, driven by a man who saw opportunity where others saw saturation, efficiency where others saw sufficiency. Sam Walton had unleashed a force that would redefine retail, not through malice, but through an unyielding pursuit of low prices. And in doing so, he set in motion a chain of consequences that would echo through decades, reshaping communities, economies, and the very nature of American capitalism. What began as a single store in Rogers would soon become a colossus, its blue signage dotting highways from coast to coast. The question was no longer whether Walmart would grow, but how far it would reach, and at what price to the world it was transforming. The 1970s unfolded as a decade of relentless expansion for Walmart, a period when the company transitioned from regional curiosity to national phenomenon. Store counts climbed steadily, reaching 100 by 1977, concentrated in the overlooked corners of the American South and Midwest. Each new location followed a proven blueprint: large, boxy buildings on inexpensive land just outside town limits, ample parking to accommodate the flood of vehicles, and vast interiors packed with merchandise that seemed to stretch endlessly. Customers entered through wide, automatic doors into a world of abundance, where fluorescent lights illuminated aisles brimming with goods priced lower than anywhere else nearby. Sam Walton remained the driving force, a restless figure who piloted his small plane from store to store, landing on back roads to conduct surprise visits. He walked the floors in his trademark khaki pants and baseball cap, engaging associates in conversation, quizzing them on sales figures, and soliciting ideas for improvement. This hands-on approach cultivated a corporate culture unlike any other in retail. Morning meetings featured the famous Walmart cheer, a ritual that bound employees together in shared purpose. Profit-sharing plans turned workers into stakeholders, aligning their interests with the company's growth. Walton preached frugality at every turn. Headquarters in Bentonville remained Spartan. Executives flew coach, and excess was viewed as the enemy of low prices. Central to this model was an obsession with supply chain efficiency. While competitors relied on traditional wholesalers, Walmart pioneered direct relationships with manufacturers. Buyers scoured trade shows and factories, pressing for the lowest possible costs in exchange for massive orders. Distribution centers sprang up strategically, allowing trucks to deliver goods overnight to clusters of stores. By the mid-1970s, the company operated its own fleet, bypassing middlemen and shaving margins to the bone. Technology, though primitive by later standards, began to play a role. Early adoption of computers for inventory tracking helped minimize stockouts and overstock, ensuring shelves stayed full without tying up capital in excess merchandise. This relentless focus on cost control translated directly into pricing power. Walmart could undercut local competitors by 10, 20, even 30% on identical items. In small towns, where options were limited, the impact proved devastating. Independent grocers, druggists, and general merchants watched helplessly as customers migrated to the new supercenter on the highway. Many tried to compete by matching prices, only to discover they could not sustain the losses. Others diversified or specialized, hoping to carve out niches Walmart ignored. Few succeeded. Studies from the era began to document the pattern. Within a few years of a Walmart opening, significant portions of local retail sales shifted away from downtown districts. The hollowing of Main Street became a visible phenomenon.
Quaint brick facades that once housed family businesses stood vacant, windows papered over or boarded up. Pharmacies that had compounded prescriptions for generations closed as residents filled scripts at Walmart's pharmacy counters. Hardware stores, the lifeblood of rural communities, saw sales plummet when tools and building supplies appeared cheaper under one roof. Fabric shops and sewing centers vanished as apparel and notions flooded in from overseas suppliers willing to meet Walmart's demands. The social fabric frayed alongside the economic one. Downtown streets grew quieter, foot traffic dwindled, and ancillary businesses like cafes and theaters suffered from reduced patronage. Yet, consumer enthusiasm remained undimmed. Families of modest means found their purchasing power dramatically enhanced. A week's groceries cost less, school clothes for children came within reach, and household essentials no longer required careful budgeting. Blue-collar workers and farmers spoke glowingly of the savings, viewing Walmart as an ally against inflation and hardship. Politicians in rural districts celebrated new store openings as economic victories, bringing jobs and tax revenue to areas long neglected by coastal development. Ribbon-cutting ceremonies drew crowds, with local officials praising the investment and employment opportunities. By 1979, Walmart's annual sales surpassed $1 billion, an astonishing milestone for a company barely 17 years old. The following year marked another turning point when Sam Walton relinquished the CEO role to Ron Meyer, though he remained chairman and the spiritual leader. The transition signaled maturation, a shift from entrepreneurial fervor to professional management. Yet the core philosophy endured: buy cheap, sell cheap, expand aggressively. The company pushed into new states, including Texas and Louisiana, where larger populations supported even bigger stores. Competition began to take notice. Kmart, the dominant discounter of the era, held a substantial lead in store count and urban presence. But cracks appeared in its armor. Higher operating costs and less disciplined buying left Kmart vulnerable to Walmart's leaner approach. Target, positioned more upmarket, focused on fashion and design, but ceded the price war. Regional chains scattered across the country felt the pressure most acutely as Walmart entered their territories. Many sought mergers or acquisitions for survival, consolidating in hopes of achieving similar scale. As the decade closed, Walmart stood poised for explosive growth. The ingredients were all in place. A proven model refined through hundreds of stores, a culture of efficiency embedded deeply in operations, and a consumer base hungry for value amid stagnant wages and rising costs. The oil shocks and economic turbulence of the 1970s had conditioned Americans to prioritize savings, creating fertile ground for discount retailing. Walton himself reflected on the journey with characteristic humility, crediting associates and customers while downplaying his own role. But those close to the company understood the truth. His vision had unlocked a formula that was scalable almost without limit. The stage was set for the 1980s, a decade that would witness Walmart's transformation into a retail juggernaut. New technologies promised even greater efficiencies. Deregulation and globalization opened doors to cheaper imports, and a cultural shift toward big-box shopping accelerated as suburban sprawl pulled populations away from traditional downtowns. What began in the small towns of Arkansas was spreading inexorably outward, a wave that would soon crash upon larger cities and reshape the national landscape. The destruction of Main Street was no longer a localized phenomenon, but a nationwide trend, documented by economists and lamented by preservationists. Yet, the momentum proved unstoppable. Walmart had tapped into a fundamental force: the American desire for more at lower cost. And in pursuing that ideal with single-minded determination, it was altering the geography of commerce in ways few could have foreseen when that first store opened in Rogers back in 1962. The empire was rising, store by store, aisle by aisle, dollar by saved dollar. And with each new grand opening, another piece of the old retail order quietly slipped away. The 1980s arrived like a gathering storm, propelling Walmart into a phase of growth that bordered on the extraordinary. Economic currents favored the discounter's ascent. Double-digit inflation early in the decade gave way to recession, squeezing household budgets and sharpening the appeal of everyday low prices. Deregulation swept through transportation and banking, lowering barriers to expansion. Globalization accelerated as trade barriers fell, opening floodgates to inexpensive goods from Asia. Walmart positioned itself at the confluence of these forces, ready to harness them with precision. Store openings accelerated dramatically. From just over 200 locations at the start of the decade, the chain surged past 1,000 by 1987. The footprint spread beyond the rural South and Midwest into the Sunbelt states, California, and eventually the Northeast. Larger formats emerged, hypermarkets combining general merchandise with full grocery sections under roofs exceeding 200,000 square feet. These supercenters devoured acreage on the urban fringe, drawing shoppers from radii of 50 miles or more. Parking lots expanded into seas of asphalt, accommodating the weekend pilgrimages that became ritual for millions of families. Technology became a decisive weapon. In 1983, Walmart invested heavily in a satellite communications network, linking every store and distribution center in real time. Data flowed instantaneously. Sales figures, inventory levels, reordering triggers. Managers monitored performance from Bentonville headquarters, spotting trends and adjusting assortments overnight. The system enabled just-in-time delivery, reducing warehousing costs and allowing thinner inventories. While competitors lagged years behind, Walmart turned information into competitive advantage, squeezing out inefficiencies that others could not see. Supply chain mastery deepened. The company demanded ever lower prices from vendors, backed by the threat of delisting slow sellers or shifting volume to hungrier suppliers. Cross-docking revolutionized distribution. Trucks from manufacturers arrived at centers where goods transferred directly to outbound trailers bound for stores, often within hours. Waste vanished. Costs plummeted. Vendors began locating factories overseas to meet the relentless pressure, initiating a migration of apparel, toys, and electronics production to low-wage nations. Walmart's buyers toured plants in China, Taiwan, and Bangladesh, forging relationships that would soon dominate global trade flows. The human element remained central. Sam Walton, now in his 60s, continued his pilgrimages, driving beat-up pickups to stores, sleeping in associates' homes to stay connected. He institutionalized the grassroots ethos through Saturday morning meetings in Bentonville, where managers from across the country gathered to share successes and failures. The culture rewarded aggression in cost-cutting and expansion. Executives who delivered growth advanced rapidly. Those who protected margins at the expense of volume risked stagnation. Walton's mantra echoed through the halls. The customer votes with every purchase, and the only acceptable vote is for lower prices. Competition buckled under the onslaught. Kmart, long the category leader, stumbled with bloated overhead and inconsistent execution. Store-for-store comparisons revealed Walmart outselling its rival by widening margins. Regional discounters like Zayre, Ames, and Caldor entered defensive postures, closing underperforming units and retreating from Walmart's path. Department store chains, anchored in malls, watched general merchandise sales erode as consumers defected for convenience and value. The phrase Walmart effect entered academic lexicon, describing the measurable decline in local retail employment and wages following a store opening. Main Street's decline accelerated into freefall. Downtown revitalization efforts, funded by municipal bonds and historic preservation grants, faltered as anchor tenants vanished. Property values stagnated or fell, starving cities of tax revenue needed for maintenance and services. Civic leaders who once welcomed Walmart now grappled with unintended consequences. Thriving big-box corridors ringed by decaying cores. Antique shops, bookstores, and specialty retailers clung to survival through tourism or niche appeal, but the broad middle of retail disappeared. Towns that resisted new Walmart permits found the chain locating just beyond city limits in unincorporated county land, draining commerce all the same. Yet resistance remained scattered and ineffective. Labor unions, wary of Walmart's staunch anti-union stance, failed to organize stores. Early attempts in Missouri and Texas met swift countermeasures. Rapid response teams flown in to dissuade workers. Mandatory meetings emphasizing direct communication with management. The National Labor Relations Board logged complaints, but victories proved rare. Low wages and part-time scheduling kept benefits costs minimal, preserving pricing power while drawing criticism for reliance on public assistance programs among associates. Consumer allegiance deepened. By mid-decade, Walmart claimed the title of America's largest retailer by sales volume, surpassing Sears in 1991. Advertising reinforced the message. Smiling families pushing overflowing carts. Voiceovers promising savings that added up to real money. The Rollback campaign introduced temporary price cuts on featured items, training shoppers to hunt bargains while maintaining the everyday low price foundation. Loyalty transcended economics. Walmart became cultural shorthand for value, its greeters and blue vests as recognizable as any brand icon. Sam Walton's final chapter unfolded against this backdrop of triumph. Diagnosed with leukemia in 1982 and multiple myeloma later, he battled illness while steering the company forward. In 1985, Forbes declared him America's richest man, a designation he accepted with discomfort, insisting wealth belonged to customers and associates. He published his memoir in 1992, weeks before his death at age 74. The book crystallized his philosophy: bias for action, servant leadership, relentless improvement. Titled Made in America, it became a bestseller, cementing his legend as the merchant prince who democratized consumption. Leadership passed to David Glass, a disciplined operator who had risen through distribution and finance. Under Glass, expansion continued unabated, but with sharpened focus on systems and scale. The 1990s loomed as the decade of consummation. International ventures, category dominance in groceries, and the embrace of e-commerce before competitors awakened to its potential. Walmart had grown from disruptive upstart to defining force in retail, its practices studied and imitated worldwide. The cost mounted quietly. Thousands of factories closed in apparel towns across the Carolinas and Midwest as production shifted overseas. Communities that supplied goods to local merchants lost multiplier effects when dollars flowed instead to Bentonville and foreign manufacturers. Environmental critiques emerged over sprawling development and packaging waste. Yet, the engine showed no signs of slowing. Low prices had become an entitlement in the American psyche, and Walmart alone possessed the machinery to deliver them at scale. The Colossus now cast a shadow that reached every corner of the nation. What began as a challenge to sleepy variety stores had evolved into an existential threat to entire sectors of retail. The old order receded further into memory, replaced by uniform blue signage along interstate exits. And as the company prepared to cross new thresholds, the question shifted from whether growth would continue to how profoundly it would reshape the economic landscape in the decades ahead. The unstoppable rise gathered momentum, carrying Walmart toward heights few corporations had ever attained. And in its wake, the transformation of Main Street from vibrant artery to nostalgic relic neared completion. By the second decade of the 21st century, Walmart had become more than a retailer. It stood as the largest private employer in the world, the biggest grocer in the United States, and a company whose annual revenues exceeded the gross domestic product of most nations. Over 5,000 stores dotted the American landscape, supplemented by thousands more abroad. Supercenters sprawled across suburban and rural expanses, their vast parking lots filling at dawn with workers restocking shelves and at midday with shoppers seeking the perpetual promise of low prices. The blue logo had embedded itself into the national consciousness, as familiar as any landmark. Yet, the consequences of this dominance now stretched far beyond the boarded-up storefronts of forgotten main streets. The transformation that began in small Arkansas towns had rippled outward into every layer of economic and social life. Entire industries had restructured around Walmart's demands. Suppliers large and small lived under the constant pressure of cost reduction, year after year, with no end in sight. Factories that once employed thousands in American textile and manufacturing hubs had long since shuttered, their production relocated to distant continents where labor and regulation came cheaper. The global supply chain, now finely tuned to Walmart's specifications, moved billions of containers across oceans, feeding the insatiable appetite for volume. The human toll accumulated quietly over decades. Generations of independent merchants disappeared, their skills and capital dissipated without replacement. The entrepreneurial ladder that once allowed a family to open a shop, build equity, and pass it forward snapped at its base. Small-town economies, deprived of local recirculation of dollars, grew dependent on the wages paid by the giant itself. Associates stocked shelves and rang registers for pay that often hovered near minimum levels, supplemented in many cases by public assistance programs. Studies documented the phenomenon. Counties with Walmart stores showed higher enrollment in food stamps and Medicaid among working families than comparable areas without them. The savings passed to consumers came, in part, extracted from the earnings of those who served them. Competition had been largely vanquished. Once mighty names like Kmart and Sears faded into bankruptcy or irrelevance, their vast networks of stores liquidated or repurposed. Regional chains that survived did so by emulating Walmart's model or retreating into niches too small to attract its gaze. Even Amazon, the digital disruptor that rose in Walmart's shadow, found itself in a perpetual duel with the Bentonville behemoth, each pushing the other toward ever greater efficiencies in delivery and pricing. Traditional grocers consolidated frantically, merging to achieve scale sufficient to negotiate with the same suppliers Walmart dominated. The marketplace narrowed, choice concentrated in fewer hands. The physical landscape bore permanent scars. Sprawling developments consumed farmland and open space at the edges of cities and towns, altering drainage patterns and contributing to environmental strain. Packaging waste multiplied as goods arrived individually wrapped for shelf appeal and theft prevention. Energy consumption soared from constantly illuminated megastores and refrigerated distribution networks that spanned continents. Efforts towards sustainability emerged belatedly. Solar panels on rooftops, LED lighting retrofits, pledges to reduce emissions. Yet the fundamental model, built on endless growth and throughput, resisted deep transformation. Public perception shifted in slow, uneven waves. Early admiration for the company that brought abundance to working-class families gave way to ambivalence. Documentaries and books chronicled the cost to communities. Lawsuits over labor practices, gender discrimination, and supplier pressure mounted, though few altered core operations. Political figures courted and criticized in equal measure, depending on constituency and moment. Calls for higher wages gained traction, leading to incremental raises announced with fanfare, yet always calibrated to preserve the pricing edge. Unionization efforts persisted, achieving isolated breakthroughs abroad, but none at scale within the United States. Technology offered both acceleration and potential reckoning. Walmart poured billions into e-commerce, distribution automation, and data analytics, narrowing the gap with pure digital players. Grocery pickup and delivery services proliferated, turning supercenters into fulfillment hubs. Artificial intelligence optimized routes, predicted demand, and personalized promotions. The same systems that once tracked inventory now monitored associate productivity with unprecedented granularity, raising new concerns over surveillance and autonomy. And still, the expansion continued. New formats tested in select markets, smaller urban stores, health clinics, financial services. International divisions grew in importance, offsetting saturation at home. The company adapted to cultural shifts, emphasizing private brands, organic offerings, and sustainability messaging to appeal to younger demographics. Leadership transitioned through successors who maintained the foundational discipline: customer obsession, operational excellence, cost control above all. Looking back across the arc of its ascent, Walmart's story reveals a profound truth about modern capitalism. A single-minded pursuit of efficiency and scale, executed with extraordinary discipline, can generate immense value for consumers while extracting profound costs elsewhere. The savings on a cart of groceries or a child's bicycle, multiplied across millions of transactions, created undeniable material progress for the many. Yet the concentration of economic power, the homogenization of commerce, and the erosion of local agency reshaped society in ways that resisted easy reversal. Main Street, as it existed in the post-war era, is gone. Not merely declined, but fundamentally extinguished as the organizing center of community commerce. Scattered revivals occur in tourist towns or affluent enclaves where specialty and experience trump price. Farmers markets and artisan shops occupy niches, supported by those willing to pay premiums for provenance and personality. But the broad middle of everyday retail belongs irrevocably to the descendants of that first discount store in Rogers. The empire built by Sam Walton endures, adaptive and resilient, its momentum undiminished by criticism or competition. It stands as both triumph and cautionary tale, proof that a clear vision, relentlessly pursued, can alter the world, and reminder that every transformation carries consequences that echo long after the architects have passed. The promise of low prices proved irresistible to consumers and unstoppable in execution. In delivering it without compromise, Walmart did not merely succeed in business. It rewrote the rules of American economic life, leaving behind a landscape forever changed, where abundance came at the price of something older, smaller, and irretrievably lost. The rise was complete. The destruction, in its quiet and cumulative way, absolute.